If you've been around woodworking for any length of time, you've heard the term veneer or veneering. Now, veneer is just a super thin piece of solid wood. And you often see it in fancy pieces of furniture where they've glued expensive grained woods, exotics, to make it look like solid woodworking, but it's really just a thin piece of veneer. Now, veneer is made by single slices or leaves coming off a log or a board, and it's often sold in flitches, which are those sequential pieces of veneer, which allow you to control the grain pattern for things like book matching. Some people think that veneering is really tricky, but in fact, it's just woodworking. And I'm going to show you how, on a sample piece, a practice piece, how to go through the basics of veneering, and I think you'll be really interested. I hope you'll want to give it a try later. All veneering is simply gluing a piece of veneer onto a core or a substrate, sometimes called a grounding. Plywood and MDF work best because they're dimensionally stable. Now, you can put veneer on solid wood, but if you think about it, solid wood expands and contracts with the season, and if it expands and contracts differently than the veneer, it can have problems. So, we're going to try veneering a piece of plywood. Let me show you how it's done. Now, got your substrate cut to size. You need to cut your veneer to length. Now, some people like to cut it over long. Some people like to cut it just undersized. And the reason that both of those techniques work is your substrate needs to be larger than the final size of the panel that you're going to use, so that you cut it to size after the veneer is securely attached. Now, to do that, to cut it to length, I need to find the length that I need and mark it off, and then put my straight edge on. And I'm going to use a veneer saw to cut this off. Veneer saws have tiny little teeth, very fine, and they allow you to cut your veneer without it ripping or tearing. Nice. So it's going to take 2 pieces of veneer to cover our substrate, which means there will be a seam, and we don't want that seam to show. So how do we make sure that this seam is tight? Well, we have to trim it so that it's 2 perfectly straight edges. Before we do that, decide how you want your veneer to look best. I already did that. I want these edges to be the ones that will be joined. So now I'm going to fold it up so both of those edges are together, and I can straighten them at one time. I'm going to do that by sticking the 2 pieces of veneer into a sandwich between 2 perfectly straight pieces of plywood, and then I'm going to plane it. Let me show you how I get that done. So now those 2 edges of the veneer are just barely sticking past the clamped together plywood, which are dead straight. And now I'm going to use a block plane to just carefully and I will have 2 perfectly straight joinable edges. And it's just that simple. Now, the traditional way to tape or join veneer together is with this water-activated veneer tape. It's been used forever, and once you get skilled at it, that might be your choice. But if this is your first time, and frankly for me every time because this is easier, I just use blue masking tape. So, start out by securing the ends. The seam fits together perfectly, by the way. Get them taped together. There's one. I like to go to the middle. There's 2. Now the other end. Then, now that you got this all perfectly aligned, 1 long strip down the center, and you're ready for the next step. Now, something that a lot of people do, but not everybody, is putting a bead of glue between this joint. You can see how it hinges open, and then we'll flatten it back up, and that'll kind of glue these edges together. So you do that just like the way it sounds. So I tried to carefully apply a bead of glue into the open joint, being more successful in some spots than others. After that was done, I laid the veneer down flat, and then I wiped it with a paper towel. That kind of squeegees the glue into the joint even more. Now, I put it into between two pieces of wood like this, so you can see that it's flexed like this, which is joining that edge together, which works kind of like a clamp. The glue will bond along that edge. Now, this is one veneer. We'll call that the face veneer. We need to have a balance veneer on the core. If you have a core and a veneer on one side, we call it a balance veneer that needs to be on the other side, and that keeps that panel from warping. Veneer is solid wood. It expands and contracts. If it was just on one side, it could flex the whole panel. So we're going to need a second panel, ta-da, that I've already had glued up and ready to go, just like the last one. And now we're going to get ready to talk about how we're going to clamp those things together, which means we need to make some parts. So before you can glue the veneer to the core, you're going to need to make yourself a veneer press, which is not as complicated as that sounds. What we've got here is a traditional veneer press. Let me describe how it works. So we have what we call our clamping caul. Next layer is a platen. This is waxed masonite. Then would be the veneer. Now your core, another layer of veneer, your waxed platen, and your final clamping caul. Then we use what we call battens, little strips of wood, to clamp the panels together. So traditionally, battens like this might be gently curved in order to help put pressure on the center of the panel. If you think about it, if you only get clamping pressure on the edges of the panel, then that will be where the veneer is securely joined, but it might be loose in the middle. So that's why you would put that curve in it. We're going to do a little trick where we take a piece of veneer, some drop from the veneer that we cut up. We're going to put that in the middle. We're going to tape it on. And now when we clamp, we're going to make certain that we have good solid pressure in the middle, which will be then evenly distributed out to the edges, and we'll get a solid glue up. Let me show you how we do that. So now you've made your veneer press, and importantly, you've tested it all out. So you've done a complete dry test with all of the clamps on all of your cauls and all of your battens. Once you know that it all goes together perfectly, now we're ready to put on some glue. I'm just going to use this 4-inch glue roller. So you can use white glue, you can use yellow glue. Titebond makes a great glue that's called cold press veneer glue. And the advantage that that has is it doesn't strike through as much. Strike through means the glue sticking through going through the veneer and showing up as a glue spot. It's important that you get a nice, good coat on here because you're not going to put any glue on the veneer. You're just going to flip. I'm just going to flip this over. Put it right on top of the veneer. Now, I'm going to start to glue this side. So now I'm applying glue to the second face of the core. I get a nice full coat on there, which I've already got. And now I put the next piece of veneer on. It's important to line everything up carefully, keep things square so you're ready to clamp. The wax side of the platen goes down. It gets aligned. The caul. And now we're ready to start clamping. All right, spin the piece. Put the battens underneath, sticking out a little bit from the edge. All 4 of them. I'll locate them better as I'm going to be clamping. Pull this edge out a little bit. Is everything aligned? It is. Now, hopefully I can get this clamped.
So obviously I need to repeat this clamp up for all 4 sets of battens.
Okay, now for the big reveal. This has been clamped up for 24 hours. It's important to keep it clamped up for a long time because, as you might guess, it's hard for things to dry squeezed into a sandwich like this. So, let's see how it worked out. Oh, that's pretty good. This is really nice. I peeled off the blue tape, checked out the seam at as tight as can be. The veneer is laying flat, looks just like a solid piece of wood. Then the final step in this process is I trimmed the panel to size. It's ready to go. And this veneer will still be laying here 100 years from now, just flat as can be. So that's the tried and true traditional way of laying up veneer. It's not that hard. I encourage you to try it anytime you decide to use some veneering. But there is a more simple way to do it, and that's its advantage. It's easier and takes less time. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is real veneer, but it's got an adhesive sprayed on the back of it, which is covered with this piece of paper. You can peel that off, then you stick it down on a panel, secure it with a J-roller, and you've got real veneer on the panel. Now obviously, this adhesive is not as powerful as the glue that we used on a traditional panel. And so it has some limitations. It's best used within the context of something like a frame and panel, where that panel that you're putting this onto is captured by like a door frame or a chest frame, something like that. But in that case, it's a great solution. So veneering offers you a lot of versatility in your work. You can use different species than you ordinarily would, expensive species that become cheaper because you're just buying a flitch of veneer. It also allows you to use really interesting grain patterns and that sort of thing. So think of that. The next time you're making something that has a captured panel or a tabletop or something like that, maybe veneering is just right for you. So I'm Rob Johnstone from Woodworker's Journal. Keep on making sawdust.